What I want to warn you against is making decisions based on whether parents want you to become a doctor, or your neighbor is a doctor, or your uncle who drives a nice car is a doctor, and that's the reason why you decide to become a doctor. Those are all the wrong reasons to become a doctor. If you can see yourself professionally being happy, not being a doctor, you should do something else. I always encourage high school students, college students, if you can, spend some time with somebody that you know who's a doctor, okay? Get a sense of what it's like in real life to live the life of a doctor. So I'm a doctor in the US, and a lot of people ask me, so how do you become a doctor in the US? So what happens, a lot of people watch these shows, right, medical shows. Everything from the ER, Grey's Anatomy is obviously a very popular one. And then people think that based on the shows, there's a lot of myths of how you actually end up becoming a doctor. So let me really tell you the real story. So initially after high school, you go to college. And in college, you take a test called MCAT, which is a medical college admission test. And then based on the results of this test and based on the interviews, people apply to medical school. Then you have 4 years of medical school. And then we'll talk more about the importance of what kind of medical school. Does it have to be prestigious? Is it okay to go to any medical school, depending on the specialty and the path you want to pursue afterwards? After the medical school, you apply for the residency. And that's the part that's actually very confusing to a lot of people. So what is a residency? Because a lot of countries in the world actually don't have the same system. You can actually start practicing medicine right after medical school. In the US, you have to go through the residency to be able to actually practice a specific field. And the residency ranges from anywhere from 3 years to 8 years. Like for example, in my case, a neurosurgical residency is the longest one. It's a 7-year residency. And then on top of this, you can also do what's called a fellowship, which is what I did. So once you're done with the residency, you decide what subspecialty you want to pursue. In my case, it was a complex spine. And that's why when I finished my residency in University of Chicago, I moved on to do a complex spine fellowship at Johns Hopkins University. So it gave me an extra level of expertise in the field of a complex spine surgery. But you don't have to do that. A lot of people don't do the fellowship and then go straight to practicing after the residency. The shortest residency, let's say internal medicine, it's only about 3 years. And then you have certain residencies that take 3 years, 4 years, let's say emergency medicine, sometimes 5 years, 6 years. The surgical residencies tend to take longer, and the non-surgical tend to take less time. And I'm sure that a lot of the people who are actually watching this right now may be in medical school or getting medical education elsewhere, and they want to see if there is an opportunity for them to actually train in the US. Obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me, subscribe to my channel, and I'll be happy to actually go over your questions and specifically tell you about different fields and the different criteria that are usually used to decide whether or not you're the right candidate for the residency spot in this specific field. So what does it truly mean to be a doctor, especially being a doctor in the US? A lot of people make a decision, early on, try to decide if they want to go into medicine, if they want to do something else. What I want to warn you against is making decisions based on whether your parents want you to become a doctor, or your neighbor is a doctor, or your uncle who drives a nice car is a doctor, and that's the reason why you decide to become a doctor. Those are all the wrong reasons to become a doctor. So you really got to look into this and see if you truly have a passion. I always say if you can see yourself professionally being happy, not being a doctor, you should do something else. Because the medical path is a long path. It's a very hard path. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of work, a lot of commitment, and it's a wonderful thing to do if you're truly passionate about this. Now, once you become a physician, there's challenges, because on one hand, obviously, you're doing this, because of your passion to help patients, but you also have to balance this out with the economics of medicine. More and more insurance companies start dictating what you can and cannot do as a doctor, and there's a continuous struggle taking place between the doctor's professional standards, their understanding of what needs to be done for the patient, and what insurance companies and the hospitals also tell you what you can and cannot do. So all of those things are very important to take into account in the decision making whether or not you want to become a doctor. Now, the other question that I'm commonly asked is that how do you decide what specialty to pursue? How do you decide on profession, right? That's extremely important. That's probably the most important thing to do once you choose to take to pursue path in medicine. The most important part is that how to decide what is profession, what is a specialty. And there's a lot of different specialties out there. And each specialty has a very distinctive characteristic, very distinctive difference. And if you choose the wrong profession within medicine, you're not going to be happy. And that's where the medical school, so usually what happens, the medical school is 4 years. The first 2 years is usually a basic studies. You study biology, chemistry, different medical sciences. And then the second part of the medical school, the third and the fourth year, usually devoted to the clinical rotations. So what does it mean? You get to expose to different clinical disciplines. You get to decide what you like the most, what kind of discipline you like, what kind of science behind this that you enjoy, and more importantly, what is lifestyle that you feel is fitting for you, whether it's the right personality. Okay, so let's say you decide to become a doctor. Okay, so you need to be realistic about it. What is the path? What are the challenges you're going to be facing in becoming a doctor? Okay, so first of all, a lot of people don't really understand what that means. Okay, so I always encourage high school students, college students, if you can, spend some time with somebody that you know who's a doctor, okay? Get a sense of what it's like in real life to live the life of a doctor. I've had many hundreds of students shadowing me, whether it's from high school or from college, not even the medical school, just to get a sense. You know, I've had college students come to the surgery with me to watch the surgery, just to get a sense of what it's like. So some of them say, you know what, that's great, it's really not for me, you know, I'm happy actually I get to see it. And some of them have this, you know, sparkle in their eyes to say, that's amazing, that's absolutely great, that's what I want to do. And I have no problem spending the next 10 years of my life going towards this path. Because it is a long path. It's probably one of the longest paths you have in a professional setting, where you actually have to go through those stages to get to where you can actually practice medicine. When you talk about business, when you talk about creating your company, when you're talking about some other things, the path is not nearly as long and as intense as becoming a doctor. But if this is your passion, it's absolutely worth it. And that's a question you're going to be asking yourself, you know, fairly early. Once you finish college, you need to get into medical school, right? It's a very rigorous selection process. It's becoming more and more competitive, depending on which medical school, what kind of score you have on your test, what kind of recommendations you have. So all of those are very important factors. Very intense medical school, but it's nothing compared to the residency, especially if you talk about the surgical residency. You start being an intern, where you essentially, back then, when I was in residency, there was no really limitations of how many hours you work as an intern or as a resident. So then they changed it. So now you have actually a certain number of hours, and it's illegal in America to make resident work more than a certain number of hours in different hours, different states. But at this point, there's a certain limitation, but still it's very intense, you know, going through this training and getting towards this goal. And the surgical training obviously is a lot more intense than the non-surgical training. So that's an important factor for you to consider as well. Once you become a doctor, you're facing a whole other set of challenges. A lot of times you have student loan. You know, when people finish and they realize that, hey, they start making money, but there's a lot of money to be paid back to the source of the student loans. And it takes several years sometimes to actually pay the student loans back. And the reimbursements are definitely not as high as they used to be. So again, as I mentioned before, if your motivation to become a doctor is financial or some sort of socioeconomical based decision, that's probably a wrong decision to make, because there's a lot of ways to make money with a lot less stress and a lot less time spent getting to that goal. So what is the main question you got to ask yourself in deciding if you want to become a doctor? The main question is that whether you have a passion to become a doctor. If you do, then don't let anybody talk you out of it, because there's a path to get there, and no matter what your chosen specialty is, you'll get there if you truly have a passion to do this. On the other hand, if you don't have a passion for this, and if you do this for other reasons, money, peer pressure, your parents want you to become a doctor, drive a nice car, you feel like this is somehow is going to give you a status. In my opinion, those are all the wrong reasons to go into medicine, because you're going to spend next decade or longer going down this path, and you're going to be disappointed if it's not truly your passion to help people and to be in the profession of medicine. So thank you so much for watching to the end. I hope you learned something. If you have any additional questions about these topics that we discussed today, please leave your comments. I will personally review this and answer any questions you have. And please subscribe to my channel and keep watching. Every time we're going to discuss different topics, and I'm sure it's going to be very interesting for you.